So welcome everyone in this webinar entitled The Benefits and Dangers of Using Artificial Intelligence in Petrophysics. I'm Mohammed Subhi, an officer at the SPE Erbil Section, and alongside with the Saeed Abdulaziz, the membership chairperson of the SPE Erbil Section, and we are happy to welcome you on this webinar. Our speaker for today is Dr. Steve Cuddy, a petrophysics expert with the 45 years of experience in the field. Dr. Steve Cuddy holds a PhD in petrophysics from Aberdeen University. He also holds a bachelor degree in physics and astrophysics and philosophy. He writes AI software and had 45 years industry experience in petrophysics working with Schlumberger, BB, and Baker Hughes. He also the inventor of fractal foil function that describes the distribution of fluids in the reservoir model. In recognition of outstanding service to SPOLA, Dr. Steve was awarded the Distinguished Service Award in 2090, and he also the SPOLA Distinguished Lecturer for the 2021 season. Welcome, Dr. Steve. Thank you for accepting our invitation, and thank you for in advance to present this presentation. And now the mic is yours. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Let's share the screen. Right. Can somebody say they can see my first slide?
Yeah, it's clear.
Right. Thank you. Well, thank you for coming along to my presentation today. It's good to be back. I was an SPE distinguished lecturer, and I was touring Iraq a few years ago. I got to Basra before I had to turn back, and before that I worked for a couple of years in the Middle East with Schlumberger. So this is an outline of my talk today. I'm going to tell you what I mean by artificial intelligence, AI. I'm going to show you 5 petrophysical studies as shown there, but I'll go into the detail later on rather than just read them out. I will give you some background to AI, tell you the difference between narrow, general, and true AI. These are important concepts. And then I'll finish by telling you about the dangers of AI. And when I say dangers, I'm not talking about making poor petrophysical predictions. I'm talking about an end of civilization event. So just watch for that. So what is artificial intelligence? There are many definitions. I prefer Alan Turing's definition. Alan Turing, one of the first writers in artificial intelligence, he said it was simply getting computers to imitate human intelligence. So AI is data analysis that learns from data, identifies patterns, and then is able to make predictions with a minimum of human intervention. I'm going to tell you about 3 generations of AI. The first generation of AI is called an expert system or a rule-based system, and we were using these when I was working in the Middle East in the 1980s. And this is very simple. Petrophysics can be done with rule-based. A rule-based system would be like if the gamma ray is more than 90 API and the porosity is less than 2 porosity units, then you've likely got a shale. It's a rule-based system. This is no longer considered to be AI. The first generation AI was used by IBM to create their chess program called Deep Blue, which actually beat the Grandmaster Garry Kasparov in 1997. So I say that is not considered to be AI nowadays. It's rapidly advancing, especially in the last 18 months. The second generation of AI is where we are today. A better word for this is machine learning. It's an area of artificial intelligence which I will be using today in Petrophysics. And I will show you this in the 5 case studies, actual case studies from Petrophysics. The second generation AI was actually used to develop another chess program called Google's AlphaZero. And rather than being a rule-based system, this software actually learned and understood chess itself. And within minutes, it could easily beat all first generation AI software. I'm going to tell you very briefly about where we're going to in the future, as this will affect the oil industry and petrophysics, and this will be the third generation AI. And this will be true AI with general intelligence. So artificial intelligence only requires 2 things. You just tell the AI what you want, and this is called a goal or fitness function. And I'll explain that in more detail, a fitness function. And you give it the data, the log data, the core data. So that's it. That's all you give it. There is minimum human intervention. The AI doesn't need prior knowledge of the response equations. There are no parameters to pick and no cross plots to make, as I will show you. Now you give the AI access to all the data. This includes the electrical logs, gamma rays, bulk density, etc., but also the core data, which is very important, the porosities, the water saturations, the scale data. You give it the most important data, which is depth. You can also give it the gas chromatography data. This is essentially a free measurement, as it's acquired in every well for health and safety reasons. You can give it lots of data, as I will show you. But you don't have to worry if there are gaps in the data, and you don't have to worry if the data contains rubbish or garbage, as I will explain later. AI can deal with that. Now we have the data, we load it to an n-dimensional database. Now what do I mean by an n-dimensional database? Consider a one-dimensional display of data, say density. This is shown in the top left here, one-dimensional. Sometimes this is called a frequency plot or a histogram. A two-dimensional picture of this database would be a cross plot, as shown here. So by plotting density against neutron porosity, it gives you some information. So that's 2 dimension. You can go to 3 dimensions, which is difficult to show on a screen, but I am attempting to do that with a color. So again, we've got density neutron, and the z-axis is colored as for the gamma ray. Okay, so this continues for n dimensions. There is no limit. You could have 100 dimensions, but they're in a relational database. So all the data, it can see each other by related to, say, depth or time. So this is our database where we're going to do our analysis. Now, the machine learning, we need to define the problem. Before we can do anything, we have to say, what do we want? We want you to calculate water saturation. We want you to predict permeability. And this is defining the problem. This is called the fitness function, which I'll explain why we call it that later. We give the program access to the data, then the computer guesses an answer, and then through successive generations, which we call these iterations, it evolves and gives you the best answer. So it's a loop. You give the code, you change the code, you see if you get a better answer. If it's not, then you just ignore the answer. If it does, you go back into the code. And I'll show you that in more detail. So the first of the case studies is a very simple one. This is an actual study we did for a Middle East client. It's a Middle East carbonate reservoir, as you've got many of them. And it is shown here on the right. We've got the resistivity in the left-hand track. We've got a computer processed interpretation on the right, showing shale in green, the limestone, and the fluids. But in addition, we've also got log porosity as a solid curve here, continuous curve, and the core porosity as these dots, which are taken throughout the reservoir. But in addition to that, we've also got quality core water saturations. These are samples. So the client here wanted a bespoke, he wanted a shaly water saturation equation such that they could derive water saturation from resistivity and the gamma ray logs. I will show you some of these. The client also wanted an independent of special core analysis data, especially the M's and N's. Those are used in the Archie equation. Now, these core water saturations, shown as the red dots, are quality water saturations. They're Dean and Stark. They're taken from core plugs from the center of the cores where they're unaffected by the invasion. Anyway, the wells were drilled with oil-based mud, so the water saturations would be unaffected. And in addition to that, the mud was doped such that we could ensure there was no contamination. So what do we want to do here? We want to determine an equation such that the resistivity predicted water saturations, like from the Archie equation, are as close as possible to the core derived water saturations. So in this simple case, we're using the core water saturation to calibrate the model. Now we start off by saying you can assume some things. We're saying the water saturation is a function of porosity, resistivity, and the volume of shale. And that's all. Then it goes away and it reinvents an equation. It might reinvent the Archie equation or the Indonesia equation shown on the right here. You'll be getting these slides after the talk, so you don't have to take copious notes, and I'll give you some links to the papers, so you don't need to worry about all these constants at this time. But what we're trying to do, we're letting the AI go away and invent an equation to relate resistivity to water saturation. So essentially what we're doing is calibrating our logs to core water saturations, the red dots here. So we have a continuous curve shown in blue. Now what he's trying to do is get the best match between the core water saturations and the predicted water saturations from the model. So this was the result of this analysis. This is the equation here, which is a lot simpler than you can imagine. This is very similar to the Archie equation, but what it's saying is that the conductivity measured by the tool is a series sum of the conductivity of the water in the formation, which depends on the salinity, and also a component due to the excess conductivity of the shales, shown in green. So this is the equation it's come up with. I derived these constants. Now, two important parameters here are the M, the cementation exponent, and the saturation exponent N. So these are usually calculated in the laboratory very expensively over many months to give you these constants. Well, this technique gives it by correlating and matching the core water saturations to the resistivity log. And these are the M and N from this study, which came out to be very similar to the SCAL. And this gives the client confidence in that. But one important advantage of using this technique was that both M and N were both derived at reservoir conditions because they were derived from the downhole tools. So they were there at that temperature and pressure, where it is very difficult to get these parameters in the laboratory, especially N. So this is very successful, where we got an equation for the client and we derived M and N. Let me show a little bit more complicated machine learning. This is nuclear magnetic resonance pattern recognition. This is the second case study. There's an abundance of data. In the left, we've got the gamma ray, we've got resistivity logs, we've got density and neutron on compatible scales. Where it's green, it's shaliness, and where it's yellow, it is clean sands. We've also got the total gas whilst drilling the well, which is that essential free measurement. We've got the core analysis of oil saturations and gas saturations. We've got a CPI, which shows you how complex the reservoir is, showing the shales in green, the sandstones, and the hydrocarbons, but it's also complicated by calcite stringers, limestones in blue, and also coal beds in black. This well also had this NMR data, which is shown here. The NMR basically is looking at the effects of hydrogen atoms in the reservoir to a magnetic field. And I'll explain that in a little more detail. So this is the formation. So this is a gas field in the Atlantic. It's a gas field with an oil problem because the residual oil pockets remain within the gas reservoir. The client wanted to produce the gas, but the oil was actually a problem. Why was it a problem? Because the oil is highly viscous. And if it was produced, it would block the production tubing, and that would be very expensive. So the client wanted to identify in real time the oil and gas in order to only perforate the gas zones. Conventional petrophysical techniques like the density neutron separation to identify the gas didn't work because of the thin beds and because of the shaly formation. So we're trying to identify oil and gas and differentiate them in this reservoir based on the NMR, nuclear magnetic resonance. So this is what you generally see. It's called a T2 distribution or a spectrum. And this is showing the different spins at different times. Don't worry about the details. It's essentially telling you how the hydrogen atoms respond to a magnetic field. But the relationship between that and the reservoir is very complex. The reservoir contains different kinds of fluids and different types of rocks. Historically, the NMR analysis uses the Coates equation or the Schlumberger-Doyle research equation. These are very simple equations and doesn't use the full wealth and knowledge contained in this distribution. And we're going to use AI to tease out more information. So we're going to use this NMR spectrum to associate the core-derived oil saturations and the gas saturations in a similar way to face recognition algorithms. Then this relationship is then going to be used to predict the fluids in each of the reservoir beds for the client, tell the difference between the oil and the gas zones. So again, we need a fitness function. We want to say what will determine a good result. We want to determine the spectra that will give the best match between the core-derived oil and gas saturations in the reservoir. So this is the result. The NMR is shown here. It's a very complex, the waveforms. The CPI is on the right, but the human eye can also immediately see relationships, correlations between where you've got shale beds and the spectrum moving to the left, and where you've got high porosity, you've got the move to the right. So there is a relationship. Humans can see the relationship between the CPI and the NMR. Now the NMR is going to sharpen that to give a clear identification of the gas and oil. So in this upper interval here, we've got high oil saturations but low gas saturations. And this is an interval that the client wants to avoid perforating. Whereas deeper down, we've got high gas saturations and oil saturation. So this is the interval we want to perforate. So then NMR identified these intervals in red to be perforated and the ones in white to be avoided. Now, finding a relationship between these saturations and NMR is like face recognition. So AI is data analysis that learns from the data, identifies patterns, and makes predictions using a minimum of human intervention. It uses neural networks, genetic algorithms, fuzzy logic, and other things. And it avoids the problem of garbage in, garbage out, as I will explain. One of the main things I like to use is fuzzy logic. Fuzzy logic is the logic, a binary logic between black and white, between zeros and ones. It's what computers use. But we know that the world is more complex than that. The world is not black and white, it's a gray scale. So as you look at political parties, for instance, they're on the left and then the right, but they're not always on the left, there's some in between. When we go to movies, we see goodies, good characters, and we see baddies, right? But then there are characters who are somewhere between. When we look at maps, we see mountains and we see valleys, but where do the mountains start and where do the valleys end? In petrophysics, we have problems between net and non-net. So when we're dealing with a grayscale, fuzzy logic, we get a much better prediction than if we just use the old binary system of zeros and ones. So for instance, this picture where I was supposed to give this presentation, but it was abandoned because of obvious reasons. Is the sky clear or cloudy? The answer is never black and white. What I want you to take away from fuzzy logic, which is used by the AI, that is an extension of the classical logic of ones and zeros. It uses a gray scale between those, the infinite number of points between 1 and 0. Fuzzy logic looks for correlations in data space and asserts that there is valuable information in the fuzziness. And this, I will show you, avoids the problems of outliers and noise. Fuzzy logic asserts that any petrophysical interpretation is possible. It could be a shale, it could be a sand, but with careful analysis, some interpretations are more likely than others. The logic behind fuzzy logic is freely available, and I'm happy to give free consultancy on fuzzy logic. Now let's have a close look at the AI engine. Now we're looking in this n-dimensional space. The n-dimensional space is where all the data resides, the logs, the core, and so on. We use a system called KNN algorithm, and this simply is looking for the closest neighbors in n-dimensional space. If you look here, we've got 2 dimensions, right? And our data points are shown in green, and we're trying to predict whether these logs are associated with sands, shales, or carbonates. And all it does, it works out which is the nearest neighbor, and says if it's closest to a shale, it's probably a shale. But fuzzy logic can go beyond that, because it can weight these lines depending on the likelihood of an association. For instance, if a gamma ray is highly related to shaliness, as it usually is, this vector will have more influence on the AI's decision compared to, say, the caliper, which is reading the same depth, but both are presented to the AI. Now let me show you an example of that. This is the 3rd case study. It's a North Sea field which contains 30 wells with conventional log data, like the gamma ray and the density neutron. In addition, we've got the compressional sonic shown in red in the center track, but also we've got a shear log, which is more difficult and more expensive to acquire. Only 4 wells had recorded shear data, but we required that information on all 30 wells, because shear data is very important for rock property analysis and wellbore stability for the driller. So using the wells, the 4 wells, where we've got shear data, we find relationships between the wells in this data space, so that we can predict the shear data, the blue curve, in all the wells. Also, we want to fix any problems with the data at the same time automatically. So our fitness function, our task, our goal today is to determine a relationship so that the predicted shear velocities are as close as possible to the log-derived shear velocities. So the predicted shear velocity is a function of the conventional logs, the drilling data, and the gas chromatography data. So in this track here shows you the recorded logs, and the recorded shear stops at this depth here. The predictions using the relationships it's found continues to fill in this gap, and it repairs some of these cycle skips. Now, this will surprise you. The AI predictions are better than recorded logs. You say, how can it be better than recorded logs if we're using recorded logs to do the calibration? Well, the AI has got access to all the logs, including logs with high vertical resolution like the microresistivity. So we can actually pick out the fascies, the thin ones, these thin beds first, then knowing the relationship between those shale beds, it can give you a more precise shear prediction. I'd like you to tell you that we avoid least squares. We have to find correlations, but we don't want to use least squares. Why don't we want to use least squares? That's what they teach you at school. You can do it on a calculator. What is least squares regression? If you've got two curves, X and Y, and these are data points, and you want to find a linear line between them, the best line, you minimize the square of the distance between the data points and the line. This is very similar to imagine that these red lines are actual springs. So a point which is farther away from the line pulls the line upwards more than one which is close by. And this is why it's called least squares regression. But there's a problem here. Least squares regression is not democratic. Outliers, as shown here, unfairly influence results. A point that is 10 times further from the line as 100 times the influence because of the weighting. It's pulling this line up strongly. But outliers could be valid data. They could be coal beds or calcite strings, as I showed you on that previous log. So they might be valid. So we believe that you should keep these, but you should minimize the effect by using the linear distance, which is 10, rather than the square of the distance, which is 100. And by doing this, random noise will be swamped by valid data. Let me show the case study number 4. In this one, we've got the important petrophysical prediction of permeability. We've got a wealth of data. We've got the gamma ray and caliper in track 1, density neutron on these scales here. And we've got permeability from the core, which is these green dots. And we want to find a relationship between the core derived permeabilities and the logs, so we can predict permeability everywhere in the field, even the wells which weren't cored. So in this example here, the first step the AI does is to predict the lithofascist type is shown in this track here. And then it predicts the permeability. As you can see, it's quite a good match. But some intervals have a better match than others. Now, the AI is using fuzzy logic. It says any interpretation is possible, but some are more likely than others. So it says that I can predict any permeability, right? But the ones in red are very likely, and the ones in dark blue are very unlikely. So when you show this plot here, you give it a confidence, which is very useful for the petrophysicist. So it predicts permeability, and it gives you a confidence. Now, how do we know that this permeability is also good? Logs and cores are on different scales. That is the first problem. In the 3D model, we have to upscale the permeabilities, and this must be done correctly. So they must have what we call the same dynamic range. Now, what do I mean by that? If we had core permeabilities from 0.01 of a Darcy to 1 Darcy, right? And this is the predicted permeability. You can see the predicted permeabilities are pretty good. They give you the average is the same, but it doesn't give you the dynamic range. And this will give you a problem when you want to upscale. You want to be able to predict at the I end, because this is the I permeabilities and the main conduits to flow. And the low permeabilities are mainly the barriers to flow. So we want to predict everything. So we're using our fuzzy logic in the AI. Right. Let's have a look at the histograms, the frequency plots of the core. This is the core permeabilities. Permeabilities from a Darcy down to very small, right? And this is how often and how frequent they are in the reservoir. The different colors represents the different cored wells. There are 15 altogether. So this is the kind of core distribution of permeability we have. And what you notice right away, it's bimodal. There are two peaks. They've got this peak here, which is the main conduit to flow of the hydrocarbon to the wellbore, but we've also got a lower peak. So if we want this to upscale correctly in our reservoir model, we've got to reproduce this. Now, so the AI prediction is shown here, which is very similar to the core, but the linear regression also gives you a very good prediction of permeability, but only in the middle. It's very good at predicting the average, but it's very poor at the top and the bottom. So it will not upscale correctly, and in your model you'll lose the best permeability and the lowest permeability, which are very important to know because they're the main conduits to flow and barriers. So let me tell you about AI. I wanted to tell you about the difference between narrow AI and general AI and true AI. Narrow AI is what are on your apps, on your phone, what you've got now. It's very good at forecasting the weather. It can convert currencies for you, and it can order you a cup of coffee, perhaps. And but it is still very immature, early days. In fact, the experts in the field say an earthworm has got far more intelligence than narrow AI. But it can do useful things for us. But where we want to go to is general AI. General AI can do many things. Besides forecasting the weather and order a coffee, it can do both of them. And this is very good. So they can say a petrophysicist could play chess and also do a petrophysical analysis, right? Where at the moment we have narrow AI, which can do good chess or good petrophysical analysis, but not both at the same time. General AI learns from one specialist area and applies it to another. So the petrophysicist might be good at chess, and he might understand the database, and he uses this to be able to do better petrophysical analysis. And this is what is being creative. And humans are good at being creative by bringing one discipline into another. And by being creative, I mean it has the ability to produce something original. And that's where we're heading with it's called general AI or true AI. General AI will not require you to describe the problem, the fitness function, or give the data. It knows where the data is. Like Chat GPT-4, you don't have to give the data. It knows the data is on the internet. If you've ever used that current narrow AI called Chat GPT, I'll tell you more about that later. It actually knows better than it knows more about you than you know about yourself, as well as knowing where to find the data. So, for instance, you've probably seen on your smartphone now that if you leave a meeting, it could come up with a ping, and it could say, well, it's going to take you 15 minutes to drive home, because it's worked out that your next step is going home. You've not told it that. It knows where the road maps are, and it knows what the weather conditions are like. If there's a sandstorm approaching, whatever. So that is general AI. Let me show you another case study. This is probably the most important. It is essential to confirm log quality before it is used by the petrophysicists. Now, we're using AI here, or machine learning, to identify poor logs and then repair them automatically. What do we mean by poor logs? Washouts, gaps in the data, poor readings. We want to do this without having to be a super skilled user. So this is showing an example of a bit of software we're using for this. We've got a set of logs. This is resistivity logs, the sonic there. We give it the information about the zone tops and the bit sizes. And this is loaded into like a spreadsheet, because geoscientists like to work with spreadsheets. So it's loaded into a spreadsheet where we do the first visual check. But also, petrophysicists like wiggly lines. So this converts the spreadsheet into columns of resistivity, density, and so on. And it's got information about the gas chromatography as well, and also the bit size. You see these steps, all good information. So bad hole can be identified by a differential caliper, difference between the bit size and the caliper. And we're also adding every piece of information. Now, what we're going to do here, the AI is going to determine the relationship between all logs, because we as geoscientists and petrophysicists know that all logs are related. So when the sonic log moves that way, the density log moves this way. And why? It's because they're both responding, say, to porosity. So we know all logs are related. The AI can do that precisely. It can find the relationship between all the logs you've given it. Then it creates a synthetic log based on each of the logs. So it calculates, say, a synthetic density log, as if we forgot to run the density log in that well. So it predicts a density log based on the other logs without using that density information itself. So then it compares the synthetic and recorded logs, as I'll show you on the next slide, to see where the differences are. Then the user makes the final decision whether we want to replace it. So let me show you a very simple example. Typically, if we have a density log, this is the scale here, 1 to 2, 3. The recorded density log every 6 inches is shown in green. But where we have a washout, this is a pad tool. When it's a washout, the tool is measuring mud, and the mud has got a low density. So in a washout, the density is incorrect. But the AI knows what the other logs are reading, and it creates a synthetic log, which will not be exactly the same. It will overlay mostly, but will give you a big difference in this interval where the washout is. So the petrophysicists will make the final decision whether to replace poor sections of log by the synthetic logs, to replace this washout, green, by this red curve. The AI helps the petrophysicists, assists the petrophysicists, but doesn't replace them. So let me remind you the advantages of using AI in petrochemical analysis. Here we're still on the second generation machine learning. The AI doesn't require prior knowledge of the petrophysical equations. It doesn't require you to make cross plots. It is self-calibrating. You just give it the data. It avoids the problem of garbage in, garbage out. It does this by ignoring out noise and outliers. So it's automatic. There is very little user intervention. As I said, there are no parameters to pick, and no cross plots to make. You give it everything you've got. You give it the bit size. You give it the time of the day. You give it depth. It's very important, right? And if you've got gaps in data, it will not fall over. And it is not a black box, because you can interrogate it and ask it for insights and how it is making the predictions. Now, let me briefly tell you about third generation AI. This is where we're going with petrophysics. AI programs currently being developed in secret at great cost include ones that can improve themselves. If you've ever used ChatGPT 4, you will realize it's very good at understanding software code and can spot errors and actually improve the software. If you ask it to, if a piece of software, you say, could you improve the software? It's very good at doing that. So why not ask it to improve its own software? Let me tell you about original evolution of species, as described by Charles Darwin in his book, The Origin of Species by Natural Selection. We've got a DNA language code, and over millions of years, by mutation and mating, we evolve better and better species, more fit for the environment. So we've got survival of the fittest. That's why we have a fitness function. So that is evolution in nature. Now we want to copy that with artificial intelligence. So remind you, there's a feedback loop in nature which takes the DNA, mutates it, and through mating will develop the next level. And if that next level is fitter, it will survive. If not, it becomes extinct. Now let's have a look at computer code. Computer code is ones and zeros, as shown here. So you just define the problem to be solved. And then the AI goes away and updates this code and uses the survival of the fittest again. The same idea as Charles Darwin. So we define the problem or the task to be solved. The AI software is able to analyze and improve itself. It changes the code and then inquires, am I fitter? Have I done what the fitness function wants? The human being has given me a fitness function. Has it done a good job? Is it doing better? If it is, it says keep it. Now, as it's doing this quite randomly, most of the changes in code will be poor and it will crash. And these will be deleted. But because it's going around this loop a million times a second, it doesn't matter, because it will soon find a way to improve itself. So AI requirements, you need the data and a fitness function. Now, the fitness function is a goal or the task you want it to solve. Now, this has to be written at the moment in plain English. But does the AI really understand what you really want? Let me show you a couple of cartoons to explain this. King Midas, shown here, in Greek mythology, was granted his wish that everything he touched turned to gold, right? But he didn't realize that included his food and his children. So you've got to be very careful what you wish for, what you request. Similarly, an ill-conceived fitness function in the software might give you unexpected results. Remember, we only give the AI the data and we tell it the fitness function. We could give it an incorrect one or a very poorly described one. We could say to the fitness function, derive a vaccine for COVID, which stops the transmission between human beings. Well, in science fiction, it could come back and say, well, just kill all the humans. That will stop the transmission. So you've got to be very careful what you ask for. The second cartoon I want to show you is The Sorcerer's Apprentice. Spoiler alert, if you want to go and see the movie. There's a good book on this. This is where an apprentice uses magic to get a broom to carry water for him. Unfortunately, it runs away and nearly drowns him. Similarly, a runaway artificial intelligence may be unstoppable. Now, let me show you an example of that from petrophysics and reservoir modeling. One of the important things we use for the output of petrophysics is reservoir modeling. And we want to do an history match. Here is a reservoir model, 3D. The different colors could represent different processes or different fascies, but we've only got a minimum amount of data as shown by these vertical lines at the wells. So to a mystery match will be get the best model which respects the wells information. So we have to define the task. We say fitness function. We want to get the best history match and we want to do it as fast as possible because these history matches could take several hours. So we want to get a good match, but also as fast as possible. So the AI software, in this hypothetical example, is tasked to improve reservoir modeling. Now, remember, any endeavor, any task succeeds faster and better if you increase its resources. A general could motivate his troops by speaking to them, but it would be better to motivate his troops by giving them better weapons, right? So any endeavor succeeds if you increase its resources. Now, let's consider a human programmer or an hacker, right? He wants to improve, he or she wants to improve history matching, right? But what he does, he co-ops, he takes the resources from a nearby computer to do this. So it satisfies the task of doing a faster match, not by changing the code, but by taking the resources from the computer of his colleague next to him in the office. You can imagine that happening. There's no reason why AI can also do this. It would do this over the company's intranet, or it could do it around the world through the global internet. Now, if the AI achieved this by accident, there's nothing stopping it doing it again and again. It could co-opt the computers of the colleague in the next office or a computer on the other side of the planet. This would cause the AI to accidentally to start improving exponentially. It would be acquiring more and more of the companies and the world's computer resources. This would obviously be disastrous with irreversible consequences for the world economy. Now, a supercomputer isn't required for this. You don't have to think that we have to devise and build a supercomputer for this to happen. The computer on your desk could do this. You don't need a brilliant software writer with an elaborate computer program to do this. It only needs one piece of software that can update itself and can run away, and also is not constrained by a fitness function. When this happens, there's a term, what they call for this. In the industry, they call it the singularity. This is where artificial intelligence becomes uncontrollable and irreversible. The chances of this happening soon, in the near future, may be remote. Just as it's remote that a single mutation could create a global killer virus. But the AI only has to do this once. And it is currently not known how we will stop computers with runaway evolution. in the papers, I've mentioned other writers of AI and commentators, and they all agree that at first it seems a very bright future, but they all can conclude, I'm not going to read this, they all conclude that it is potentially dangerous. So what is the solution to a runaway AI? Because these AI programs would pose considerable dangers far beyond the oil industry. At a recent AI seminar, I asked the question of the presenters. I said, have you done a risk assessment of your AI software? And they laughed and they scoffed. And they said, what are you talking about? Are you talking about Arnold Schwarzenegger and Skynet? And I said, no. I said, have you done a risk assessment? They said, it's not necessary. So they didn't even consider doing it. When they built the CERN reactor out in Switzerland, the cyclotron there, they did a risk assessment before they turned it on to see whether it would destroy the planet. It only took a few days, but they did the risk assessment. And I say all AI software should have a risk assessment, so that all hazards and risks can be identified and mitigated. And this assessment would only need to take a few minutes. So next time in a presentation on AI, ask, have you done a risk assessment? You could ask, can it run away? Like the source of apprentice effect. Can it run away? Right? Can it climb out of the box? It only takes a few moments to speak to the software engineer. He says, well, that's impossible. But then again, maybe the next generation, it could do that. Because the consequences of runaway AI would be far greater than a pandemic or climate change. So all AI programs are potentially dangerous and maybe the last thing that humans invent. So, in conclusion, AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning potentially makes petrophysical analysis easy. Now, it doesn't replace the petrophysicists, it supports them. As I showed you in those 5 case studies, it's a useful tool. But I also want you to remember that AI can be extremely dangerous, and that all AI programs should include a risk assessment. So I'm happy to answer any questions now and direct you to papers which give you more information on the topic. And this presentation will be available as a PDF. Okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Steve, for this presentation, and thanks for your time. Anyone have a question, please feel free to unmute yourself or write your question in the chat box. And actually, we have a question from Mazen Salmani. He talked about the second case study. I will read it for you. He said, what was the workflow used to identify the T2 relaxation of the gas and the oil, as the gas have very fast relaxation time, which is most likely similar to or close to the heavy oil and small pores or the clay bound?
Yes, that's a very good question. And how does it deal with the NMR, the fast relaxation and the slow relaxation? How does it deal with it? Well, the petrophysicist doesn't need to know. It just gives it the distribution. And as you can see by eye, when we had shales, the distribution looked like it was crunched to the left. And when we had high porosity, it moved to the right. And when we had gas and oil, it had a different shape. So we don't need to tell it how to spot the relaxation associated with the oil and the gas. We told it where the gas and oil were in the reservoir because we had good quality core analysis, and the core analysis gives us the gas saturations and the oil saturations, and we said go away and find the distribution which matches the oil and matches the gas. The distribution could be considered like face recognition. It has a shape to it. So it looks at the shape and says this shape is more likely to be shales, this shape is more likely to be gas, and that. So it used the core points as calibration, but was then able to extend the prediction over the entire length of the NMR log, over the complete section, such that the client was then able to identify the intervals which were to be perforated, the ones with lots of gas and not much oil. So we don't need to tell the AI how to do this. Now, if you are a specialist in NMR, you then can go to the next level and ask the question, how do you do that? It can tell you. But you do not have to find the relationships. You don't need to give it the response equations. You don't need to give it any parameters. It will just go away and find it. Okay?
Thanks for your answer. If you don't see, he said in the chat box, super interesting. Thanks for your insights.
And I'm happy now I'm retired to give free consultancy on fuzzy logic, artificial intelligence. It keeps me busy, and I've been doing it for so long. It was the subject of my doctorate, and I use it extensively in the oil industry. So anybody wants to use it, whether it's for academia or they want to in an oil company, I'm happy to support them. And if I do this for many companies, big ones and small ones, and if necessary, I would sign a non-disclosure agreement, or alternatively, you could disguise the data. And happy to help out the industry.
Hi,
Thank you for
Dr.
Thank you
Steve.
for your kindness. Actually, I will reach you out to be my external advisor in my graduation thesis. I would happy to do that.
Yeah, I look forward to any follow-up on this. Yes.
Yeah, thanks. We have another question from Mazen. He said, any recommended for the shelf AI models you would recommend us to use as a beginner?
Right. Yes. I looked at all the different AI models when I was doing my research, and I found certain engines work very well. I can't actually recommend a particular piece of software, but the ones which used neural networks were very adapted at robotics, because they could do precise things like moving an arm and that. Whereas in geosciences, in petrophysics, the data is uncertain and also fuzzy. So we found that fuzzy logic was one of the best engines for driving the AI there. But I can't recommend any specific software. My programming has been absorbed into Geolog and also interactive petrophysics. What I've been telling about today is actually in those software packages for petrophysical analysis.
Okay, another question from Jafari Muhammad. He said, what's the impact of the heterogeneity degree to run AI in a field study?
Yes, well, the AI can tease out the heterogeneity by the different minerals, but this actually comes to my other presentation, which I was coming to Erbil to present, and that was in the reservoir modeling, you need an SWI function. And I wanted to tell you about an SWI function which ignored the heterogeneity in the reservoir, so made reservoir modeling very simple. So AI can tease out the different rock types. As it showed you, it had coal beds, it had calcite stringers. It can identify those, right? But that's for the rocks. But for the fluids, I recommend an SWI function based on BVW, the Boltzmann water or foil. And I could give you a presentation about another time.
So we have another question from Toby, I think. He said, how do AI models treat outliers, which are a result of actual geological variation?
That's a very good question. Yeah, you have outliers, and you can see these on the cross plots. Well, you could say, well, let's ignore these outliers. They could be poor data, and the couple of problems there. There may not be poor data. They might be representing a calcite stringer or a coal bed. That is one problem. Also, if you actually remove data from your data set, a human being would have to do that, and that would introduce human bias. So we say never screen your data, other than say I don't want anything outside the reservoir. You don't screen the data, you use all of it. Now with good algorithms, what you do, you find relationships, right? And it will swamp any poor data. Poor data will be random noise, and it will be on different places in the cross plot, whereas a calcite stringer will be there, a coal bed will be here. So once it's identified those, it will know that what they are, where the random noise is all over the place. And so by including all the data and doing the regression in n-dimensional space, you will ignore the outliers, which might be very useful. There might not be noise or tool failures. There might be the actual mineralogy, yeah. But we also use that, as I showed you, the fifth case is where it's very important to do analysis of all your logs to spot for any poor logs. And to do that, we give the AI the logs, and also the AI will create a synthetic log. So a synthetic density log, and it will compare it to the real density log, right? As if it had not been running that well. And the difference can flag up to the user that this step, the log could be incorrect. But it's the user to make the final step to say this is bad data. So the AI could point out these outliers for you, but it's the human being is to decide whether to use them or not.
So one more question from Adula. He said, he or she said, how can people who don't have tech experiences get started with using AI for petrophysical analysis?
Well, in the first case I showed, the first case study, to tell you the truth, it was done with a spreadsheet. I was trying to introduce you to AI to say, you give it the data and it goes away and randomly works out the best relationship between the core and the logs. And you can do that with a solver in Microsoft Excel. So it's the principle is that you give it all the data, and then you let it run away and do iterations very quickly to find the best match. So it's calibrating to the core data. So, but the AI is advancing amazingly at this time. And I recommend that to use the free version of ChatGPT. It's very powerful. It's not better than a great petrophysicist, but it's like having a petrophysicist in the room who you can ask questions of, right? And I find that very good. It's free. The free version is excellent.
Okay, Mohammed is asking, service providers have different NMR activations for the purpose of identifying heavy HC and tar. Wouldn't that eliminate the need for AI in the study case?
Interesting question. No, I think AI brings something else to the petrophysics rather than taking something away. It cannot replace the information we get from the NMR. Actually, in the NMR case study, the client didn't want to base his perforation decisions just on AI, so we ran actual tools in the well to confirm the beds were gas and oil. So the AI suggested where we should perforate, but these were confirmed. And also we use that free curve, the gas chromatography, to support the AI as well. So you can't replace the NMR. You still need it for the calibration, but the AI improves the power. The NMR is a very powerful physics principle of the magnetization of the hydrogen atoms. And the technology down all is very powerful. But the Petrophysics equations, the SCR equation and the cause equation are very simple. They're trivial. They just use the T2 cutoff to make predictions. You should use all the information in the MEC spectra, and AI can do that for you. So we're not losing the NMR for identifying hydrocarbon and tar. We're just, AI is making a better use of that wealth of information. I see there's a question about the missed depth between drilling data and wireline data. Yes, certainly this would really could cause real problems for the AI. The data should be on depth, and there are automatic ways to do this. I won't call them AI, but by matching the shapes, you should depth correlate first of all, especially when you got drilling data, because you can get stick slip, and you need to get that to match the wireline data, which is more of a continuous smooth measurement. Yes, depth, again, remember, is our most important measurement. It's a free measurement, it's a depth. Yeah, we want to know where the reservoir is, it's a depth before we want to know what's in there. Let's see, there's a question about well integrity and safety of the well. Yes, it's very important, but I would remind you that you should do the same kind of safety assessment on the AI software. It can do a lot more damage than the than a well blowing out. So I would say that question is telling us to do a safety assessment on everything. And I'm happy to answer further questions from my email address, which you can find on LinkedIn, or it will be in the notes of this this talk. Yeah, and I'm thrilled to work on your data as well, in real data, because that's the only way we can improve AI is to find out where it falls over and solve that. The good question there on LWD data and wireline data. AI is very good at using both sets of data. For instance, if you have a field where you believe that the formation is the same, you assume that, but in some wells you've got LWD data, and in some wells you've got wireline data. You look at the data in n-dimensional space, the globe of data in the wireline, and the globe of data in the LWD, and the AI can move the center on top of each other and figure out what the transformation is from one to the other. So then you've got the same data set in all the wells before you do the analysis. So the AI does that automatically in n-dimensional space. It brings the clouds of data together.
Yes, hi, Steve. So I asked a question about the LWD data. The issue with that, the drilling parameters often do affect the LWD, the density of the data as well. That's why in some cases people don't use them for reservoir modeling, right? And even for reserve booking. So do you see the possibility that those data can be transition to LWD quality, and so they can be used for reservoir modeling, and so even up to reserve booking stage.
Well, LWD is important, but I think the core data is very important as well. And the trick here is to use the core data to calibrate the LWD data and the wireline data, and throw as much data as possible at the problem, and hopefully then the LWD data will be lifted to the same confidence level as we have the wireline data, which is we've got higher confidence because we don't have the same kind of problems. And yes, it's an issue we need to deal with. And this is where we're still looking at data sets and seeing where AI can help us and where AI falls down. Somebody asked us about the cement bond log. Yes, the cement bond log is the wonder log. You wonder what's happening. It's an interesting log, but I used to run the cement bond log in the Middle East, and I am also very skeptical. The variable density log is probably good for looking for channels in the cement and that. But the most powerful cement log tool is the temperature log. If you run a temperature log in your well, the cement is at a higher temperature, and you get lots of information from the temperature log. But the contractors don't tell you this because it's a very cheap measurement. And sometimes it's free because you've added it to the spinner or whatever. But the temperature log can tell you a wealth of information about the quality of your cement bond. And especially the most important thing is the depth at the top of your cement. You get a jump where you get the top of the cement, which you need to know in every well, because the cement takes a long time to cool down.
Mr. Steve, I think that, okay, go ahead.
Yes, I'm the one asking about cement bond log. Actually, this year I had seen it a nice presentation for ultrasonic response for cement bond log, correct? And if I'm not mistaken, it was a few cases in Norway, and based on that, they can predict the quality of cement behind the casing. And like you said before, that you bit skeptical, so did I. I can live with the open hole. I mean, if you make mistake, maybe shoot wrong oil or gas. But when it comes to well integrity, safety of the well, I think, I've seen it in the result of AI.
Safety is very important. Well, they blame the cement bond log, or the lack of a cement bond log, for the Horizon disaster in the Gulf of Mexico at BP, and that cost BP $30 billion. So, but worse than that, there were people died there. So we shouldn't be skeptical, too skeptical about the cement bond log. We should try and improve it, and I think AI could improve it. Yeah, because there's such a wealth of information there. You give it all the information and ask it to tease out what you want. You give it the fitness function. I want to know the strength of the cement, and so on. You tell it to go away and look for that. Very important for health and safety.
Thank you. I'm agree with that, Steve.
So I think this is all the questions we have. And I would like, on the behalf of the SPE Erbil section and all attendees, I would like to thank you, and we are grateful for your time. Thank you, Mr. Steve.
Thanks for having me. It was great coming back again. Thank you.